Oh my God, it's happening.
There's three of us. That's so
There's
weird.
three of us today.
Ooh,
Um, this show is called
you're
You're
doing it
Doing It
wrong.
Wrong. And historically, it's been a twink and a whore. What's Brad? A bird watcher?
This is funny because we're gonna get right into it right off the bat.
Brad is the most lesbian coded cis man I've ever met in my life. I was so confused by him the first time we met. I was like, you are dressed like a Highland Park lesbian. And you were like, I'm from the Midwest. This is like, actually, it's not like appropriative. This is like, I've worked in factories. I was like, I don't understand.
Why
This
would you
is
wear?
so funny because I've told this story now of you two being like, yeah, you're obviously queer because you dress like a lesbian, and me being like, I'm literally wearing like my father's outfit. Like when I was born, my dad wore like the same Carhartt and like, you know, and that's what I wear. And now people are like, oh yeah, you'll fit right in with us. We're all queer. And I'm like, oh, cool.
Yeah. And like the mustache now, too, I feel
Oh
like has
my
become,
God.
it's like a deeply like, it's like a flag of like, you're either bi or you like getting pegged by older women. Like, I don't, it's definitely a kind of like, I'm a sexy young guy, kind of like nebulous queer thing. And you're just like, no, my dad had a beard, so I have a mustache.
Yeah, you fit right in at the Eagle.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, so now this conversation has happened many times. It just happened the other day. I met with a couple people who are both gay men, and we had this conversation about what am I? And I was like, because one was like, you can be queer, like not in a sexual way, but like in your like interest, if you like defy so many social norms, like that's queer, right? And the other was like, no, that's not queer. Like, stop making queer
Mm.
just anything that you like in other people. Um,
I like this. We talked about this in my neurodiversity class recently. Like the author, she's a trans woman, and she talks a lot about queering as a verb and decoupling from queer as identity and being like queering as action and like what are you queering in your life rather than having, and she's obviously a queer woman, so I thought it was interesting.
yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a dog in that fight, except that like I'm okay with whatever. If I was like joking with that couple I was mentioning that like, cool, let's go. I get my like I get to join the community. I get to be, part of the squad, so I'll take it.
You are part of the squad, and that is, it is funny how that happens. Like, well, so okay, I want to say that Mia and I were both following, we were following your account. We were following Brett's account, right? And then
Mhm.
we found out together that we were following it. And I had this idea in my head that you were a big titty goth girl.
And I thought you were like a mask dyke like NB person. And and then it you posted a photo of you and we were both like, "Oh."
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people have said that now. Like, in fact, the first recording of a podcast I did for the page, which isn't out, my bad, but was with someone who's like, I totally thought you were like a South Asian brown woman undergraduate student, and I was like,
You know,
surprise.
Brad, that's really interesting in terms of like the idea, like that paper that you just wrote on like nature as a mirror, because people are projecting onto you just who they want you to be. Like, who do they want to be running that account? Um, okay, sort pause though, because we're having a slight technical situation where I can hear you from my room before you talk on Zoom. So how can we fix this so that I'm not getting bleed? Maybe can you like face the window or something? I know that's not.
Risdon, do you hear that?
Oh yeah, do you hear Brad twice?
No, it's probably just because he's proximal to you, right? Is that
I
what's
know, but
happening?
I'm wondering if my microphone is catching it.
No, it's, Brad, will you talk for me again?
Yeah, I feel like if it is doing that, then Risdon would hear it. Like whatever Risdon hears is probably how the recording is going to hear it.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah, I think
it's
you're
on
right.
me
Okay.
now.
All right. I'm not gonna edit that out because I don't want to. So, um, I wanted to also, well, okay, so Brad, wait, let's share how we then ended up meeting each other. Okay, so you sent me a photo of my own handle that I have tagged all over East LA on the sidewalk. And I was like, oh, well, now I know you're in Los Angeles. And you were like, I just moved to Glendale. And I was like, I live in Glendale. And then we met up and started hanging out. And then I met your partner, who I also adore. And we became friends. And now we're on our podcast.
And
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's like it's really funny because we had just started following each other. I don't know exactly how that happened, but I definitely like I remember seeing your account and really enjoying the like nuance because a lot of people, you know,
I hate that word so much.
I, I love nuance. Anyway, yeah, I we followed each other somehow and then I saw your tag
Yeah.
and was like, "Oh, that's so cool." Sent it to you and then yeah, we found out we live right by each other.
Yeah.
And started hanging out. So
And currently, Brad's in my bedroom.
yeah,
So, with my dog.
Oh,
Can you show her? Oh, baby.
she loves you.
She does love Brad. Brad
very
took care of
nice.
her and my cats while I was out of town last month. So
Hmm,
yeah, they have a really sweet relationship.
that's cute.
Um, okay, so what, um,
I
I
met
don't know.
Brad
Yeah,
through Mia. Mia was like, you should meet Brad, like
yes.
multiple times. And I was like, all right, because it's hard for me to exist in the real world. I exist mostly exclusively online as an entity, but we went and got coffee. And then that's when I was like, very surprised that you're a heterosexual. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
but they
surprise.
exist.
They do
Surprise.
exist. There's a lot of us out there.
Even on the east side of Los
Even
Angeles.
in Northeast LA, they do meet, they exist.
But to
You
be
meet them.
fair, I live in Glendale, so
Yeah, okay.
that's where we hide.
Yeah. It's sort of like when you see like a fantastic animal in the wild, you're like, oh, like I've heard of these and I've seen them on television and it's real. It's a real live one. It's so
Yeah.
cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
honestly we should talk about that because like I am so into how we get like in our bubbles of social groups and then like forget what the world is like outside of that. We don't have it.
Mm,
But I just found this so interesting because like people really just forget. Like sometimes I have friends who are like, yeah, like everybody's queer and trans and I'm like, no, they're not, bro. Like, that's your circle. You forgot,
yeah.
you know?
No,
Yeah.
that's so true. That's so true. I mean, it reminds me of when Trump was elected and everyone was like, how did this happen? And I'm like, you
Right.
haven't been to America, like even for
Right.
me, like I mostly go to major cities, but sometimes I'll drive through places between major cities like Lafayette, Louisiana. That's fucking America. And it's crazy. It is not Highland Park there. Like it's wild. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I have cousins in Pennsylvania and they call it Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's Trump country there outside
Yeah.
Philly for sure. Yeah.
Well, at at risk of like just wandering and weaving and talking forever about all kinds of things because we like each other, I wanna like the stuff that we have in common that we've like talked about. I think we share a lot of views on cancellation. We share a lot of views on like Brad and I have been talking a lot about shadow lately, and I think Risdon, you and I talk a lot about that. And Brad, I know like you're into stages of development, and then like ritual and stuff. So and then of course there's God. There's always God, which is like where we end up, I think.
Right. So how much time do we have for this podcast? Like
Yeah, well
40 minutes?
you're
Yeah.
the one with a heart out. So let's just so God, um, I really like what you said earlier, Brad. So I'm going to ask you to just repeat it if you can about cancellation and God.
All right, let's go. So it was mentioned that that a subject we want to talk about. So I before we started recording, um, I mentioned that like the biggest reason that I have to like despise cancel culture is that like one of the only spiritual like truths that I hold for myself, like one of the things that I really believe in beyond like a very basic materialist worldview is that like every person has a purpose and has like an expression of who they are that the world needs. And like I at times I feel that so much, just that like when I feel my healthiest, like what comes up for me is that like every person is like a unique individual who like when they are being who they truly are, expressing themselves authentically, that is what we need, and that's like what I want. Um, and I see like cancel culture and like shame as just like preventing people from being that and from doing that. It's like, you know, the idea that people have to stop that, they make a mistake and then they shouldn't be able to do that. We should prevent them from doing that. As one of the things that I like truly hate about that. And the more that I have conversations about it, especially in vulnerable spaces with men, um, it's shocking how much people talk about how like shame and unworthiness prevent them from like doing the things that they want to do, whether it's like I mean anything, whether it's like being public with their interests, whether it's like chasing a goal, whether it's like doing good work. Like so many people are like, I have this really beautiful thing I want to give to the world, or I want to help people like grow, but I'm not worthy because these people said I'm like really bad or like really like, this mistake or whatever. And I hate that. I don't want that. I think that sucks for everyone. And I think it's really cruel to like to do. That's my feeling. Like my spiritual belief that everybody has something to give and that they should do that is what makes me like hate cancel culture.
I I so agree with that, and I think it's not just once someone experiences cancellation that happens. I see so many people afraid of the possibility of ever getting canceled, and then like not pursuing whatever that calling is. I heard, I don't remember where I heard about this, but it was like someone who I know who was a school teacher, I think a high school teacher, and they had a student who was like an incredibly talented like fashion designer and who got into FIT and then didn't go and ended up, I don't know what they ended up doing, but when the teacher asked like why didn't you go, they were like I'm too afraid to get canceled. So like right. So it's like, and I feel it in my life, I've experienced like I've gotten like a taste of what cancellation can be like, but I've never like experienced it on a really large scale. And I've watched myself have fears of like, well, that could happen. And so I don't want to, get to like, I don't, I've thought about it in terms of like performing my own show, like being the face of this musical that I'm writing, like it's like, well, I'm safer if I'm just the writer or I'm safer if I'm producing, but if I'm like the visible face of it, then I'm much more at risk. And like that's in anticipation of the potential of something that isn't even a sure thing. So I see that around, and Brad, I mean, I see it in, we've talked about it. Not to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, at this point, like everybody who I have real conversations with has expressed the same fear, no matter like how saintly they really are. Um, this came up a lot in my last travel experience, where like people were expressing like just the total fear of being seen because of like watching people go down for whatever, and like everybody kind of having this experience of being like, if that person's going down for that, I've done so much worse in my past. So like
mm-hmm.
I'm already like excluded from being able to have something. But yeah, I feel it too. And in one particular conversation, someone brought up like how many people feel the need to confess things
Yes.
like impulsively because like they're just like watching people like, be publicly shamed for stuff where like the vast majority of people on the planet have done at some point, like whether we were really young or whether it was a mistake. Um, and so people are now like, you know,
Like
confessing.
preemptively. I
Yeah.
know. Liam
Like, here's
Neeson
the
did
worst
that.
thing that I've ever done. And like that pressure is really weird. And that person was describing it as like the panopticon that we've all created. Like everybody's the cop and everybody's
Mm.
the fucking like, oh, if everybody's a cop, I have to like confess to everybody. It was just like an insane place to be.
It makes me think of that, the crabs in the bucket thing, where like if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, oh, Mia, you don't know this one? Of course, Brad knows it. So you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket. If one of the crabs starts to get out, the other crabs pull it back in. I know, look at your face right now. I think there's
Why?
why? Because they're like, I don't know. Maybe Brad knows the psychology of it. But I think for people it's very like don't be too sparkly, like, and I think there's
Yeah.
sometimes culture stuff around that, like don't shine too bright, don't take too much space, like because you're going to attract the wrong kind of attention, right? There's like the is it the Mallorca or whatever, there's like different things in cultures about avoiding evil eye,
There's
because you're drawing too much attention to yourself.
in Australia, I know they have this term tall poppy syndrome. And people like want to cut you down when you're, you
Mm.
know.
Yeah, there's certain cultures, like I just learned this about uh the Danish, I think, they like really don't like when people stand out. That's like a thing in their culture they do not fuck with, which I feel like in America we have a lot of cultural like whatever around like you should be exceptional, you should be individualistic, you should rise to the level of your talents and capabilities. And I noticed from working in like restorative practices that most of my clients are leaders in niche spaces, where there's like
Oh,
it's already a little fringy, it's a little like insular, and the people who end up shining a little too brightly in those often identity based or like niche interest spaces are the people that get cut down. And it's interesting because it's like some of them have fucked up, but a lot of them it's like kind of de rigueur, the things that they've done. So
I think Brad has some experience with
the mustache is quivering.
that.
Yeah, there's so much to say. I like one of my frustrations with like the kind of online social justice scene that to me is so annoying is that it's been like an archetype across cultures, across time, that like people will find ways to drag you down if they're envious of you. And that's just a like human literature has been
Yes.
like, hey, there's a theme here that like even someone who's just really kind and beloved, someone will seeing that and slander them, tear them down, even murder. Like how many stories do we have of like, I don't know, Joseph and his dream coat and people being like, fuck that dude for having this.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, fuck that guy. Like I don't have a coat like
Why'd
that.
he get a coat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it is so obvious, I think, to so many people, but we have this entire space that's like, no, actually, like tearing people down is always good. And I'm just like, grow up, like be for fucking real. Like it's so silly, it's so annoying. I'm like at the point where I just can't even with like people who are there. Like, yeah, actually all the things, like all the gossip is always good. I'm like, are you okay? Like seriously, are you okay?
No.
I'm glad no. I'm glad to
Mm-mm.
hear you say that, Brad, because I feel like that's like not what you were saying even a few months ago. Excuse me as I burp through my words. I mean, I definitely experienced that a couple years ago, and am still in the process of kind of like moving through it and recognizing like what was fully going on. And there were areas where like I definitely had some room for improvement, and then being able to like identify where those areas are and separate where the areas are that I was like just fully being projected onto, being torn down because I had the shiny coat or whatever. Like, um, and then also recognizing like this is someone else's shit. And I think, Brad, it's like it makes me think about stages of development that you've talked about. I feel like we were talking about this the other night over dinner about like, the way that, well, oh, we were talking about like laws, and Risdon, you and I were talking about this too, that like there's like the way that our legal system tries to like identify who fucked up in a situation so that we can punish them and spend more resources to like identify and then punish them. And then like I feel like those laws creep into our minds and then lead us down these like very black and white thinking paths. I know this is like vague, but I'll tether it to reality. So like those laws, Risdon, that you told me about that are like if anyone has any alcohol, like this is in certain states, it's not true in California. I was looking this up, but in some states you said like if anyone has had any alcohol, then they couldn't consent. And like that
And it's
to
only
me,
women. In New York, it was only women if a woman has a drink of alcohol. So if it's two men, the law doesn't apply. I know. Look
oh,
at your
that's
face.
even worse.
Yeah, I know.
That makes me want to murder. Jesus Christ. Okay, so like that to me is absurd because first of all, how are you defining a woman?
Oh,
Okay.
teeth.
Yeah. Okay. Second, you can't tell me that if I have a glass of wine and then I have sex with the person that I was on a date with, that I've been raped. Like, you cannot tell me that that is the experience that I just had. And when our laws try to do that, like those make their way into people's minds and then they try to put that on situations, and I think we talked about this. I was talking to Sarah of Comprehensive Consent about this last week too, and the week before about like that this isn't really like tethered to anyone's experience. It's more about like this sort of, she was talking about this like sort of false binary of like that if something didn't feel good then it was not consensual, and if something did feel good then it was consensual, and also the reverse. So like if something was non-consensual then it didn't feel good, which isn't always true, and then if something was consensual then it did feel good. And so when someone has an icky feeling after sex, let's say, and sometimes that comes later because the sex was great and then the person didn't want to see you again. And then retroactively, you're like, oh, had I known you wouldn't want to see me again, that's information I should have had. I couldn't give informed consent. Like these are the mental gymnastics that we're doing because we're trying to create checklists and rules for consent that are based in our totally bullshit legal system. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Because everybody wants everything to be super safe, bumper car world. And it's like, that's not, we're in the Wild West, y'all. Like, it is
Right.
not like that.
Wow.
Mustache twitch.
Let's go. No, I mean the wanting everything to be super safe, is basically what I wrote that Substack essay about. Is that like, um, so this was about animals because my page is about animals, but I always, of course, like try to be a little bit deeper than just animals. But there's like, so in particular, like a response to animals. Like I wrote this essay about like basically grief and shadow, and the grief that like to be alive on this planet necessarily implies that like we are taking life and we are causing harm. And like this is literally true. Like, and there's like a bunch of people who are really mad and like, well, actually, I'm a vegan, so I don't kill animals. And it's like, how'd your house get there? Where'd the wood
Uh-huh.
come from? What was the foundation built on? Probably a prairie. What lived in the prairie before you? Like, what does your cat eat? Oh, factory farmed torture meat. Like, are like there's so much. Your car, the roads that it went through. Like, it necessarily to be alive means that something else isn't. Even if it just means like hand sanitizer on your hands and massacring like, billions of bacteria. Like anyway, the the responses were really telling because people were like really upset with the idea that like there was a few responses that were people saying like it's wrong for a wolf to eat a sheep. And I'm like, you know,
Let's hold that wolf accountable, you
I
guys.
mean, it's just
Deplatform that wolf.
but like in the essay, it's like exactly what I'm talking about. And the thing that I'm getting at is that like one of the quotes, I don't remember. I wish I could pull it up. And it's myself, so I should remember. But um, one of the quotes in the essay is like when you need the world to be safe and you take your activism from that place, like actually it's more about like your control than it is like a sincere desire to like change things or protect things for good. You basically like create a form of activism where everything is about yourself needing to be safe from anything, and you haven't really come to terms with like, one, you're going to die,
Hmm.
and like you're going to experience harm and you're going to cause it. And it's not like okay, let's go around harming people then. It's that like you're going to be in a better place to prevent harm if you understand like your role within it all. And ultimately like the person is safer who can say like, yes, the foundation of my home is built on like, I don't know, the graves of prairie dogs or something. Like, yes, my life caused harm, and here's the ways I can not cause harm, rather than someone who's like, I've never caused harm. And I think those people are the most dangerous ones. And
Yes.
Yes.
like when you can't say like, yes, here's the way that I'm just accepting that I will continue, um, it's like the need to deny like your own culpability that is really scary to me. And I think like the responses were so like clear to that, like people being really like they want villains, they want victims, and they want to be a savior. Um, that's the scary part to me.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
And
think it speaks to this shadow thing that you guys talked about. It's like there's this I had this boyfriend for a while, and I remember him saying to me, I may have said this already, but he was like, "You love violence." And I was like, "No, I don't love violence, but I have integrated the fact that life is violent." Like I used to be a vegan. I was vegan for 2.5 years, and I was sick the entire time. And I had to, and so it was sort of this reckoning within me of having to accept the fact that in order for me to thrive in the way that I'm designed does involve a level of subscription to violence. And I think obviously some violence is avoidable, but some kind of isn't by being here on this planet. It's part of the design. Anyway, and people who are avoiding that or like, I can't have any part of that. I think you're right. It speaks to sort of, frankly, a lack of involvement or something. I'm sort of like, baby, why are you still watching Disney? Do you know what I
Yes,
mean?
that's exactly what I was thinking as Brad was talking. I was like, how much does our media play into this? And like Disney came to mind because
Mm,
you have these clear villains, right? And then you end up with stories like this isn't Disney, but like Wicked, or where it's like someone tries to understand the villain. And like I feel like actors know this so well because when you play a villain, it's really one dimensional if that villain has no um understandable motive, like what's your damage, right? Like, and but when we grow up on these fairy tales that are like there's someone who's obviously wrong and there's someone who's obviously pure, the Little Mermaid, like Ursula is obviously bad, there's like witches and then Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, like how much does that make its way into our mind and go like, well, I know, obviously I know who I want to be. And if I'm not this, then I must be that, and that's all bad. I think you're right. I mean, it is a stage of development, like the idea of being able to go like, how do I participate in this instead of like, how do I just not be that?
yeah, I think like personally, like I feel so embarrassed of like all the time I spent in my life where I wasn't able to like own my shadow because like I was just projecting like, and I like now that I'm in a place where I like really know my flaws and my mistakes, it's my life is so different just from that. Like when I experience conflict, like, we have these like values like forgiveness and mercy and blah blah blah. And people say they like that, but then don't act from that place all the time. And I think that was true for me until I really like stopped like over identifying with like a good persona or whatever. And like for me, um, when I can like see myself in the person I'm angry with, my response is entirely different. And so for an example, like recently, there's like this guy who's like really viral, two guys, because they're like pushing over stones at like a national park. And there's people in the comments of all these viral videos, like literally like this guy should die, he should be in prison, blah blah blah. And like, don't get me wrong, like it is very annoying people going to national parks and acting up and like not like following rules that make this a better experience for everybody. But I'm like watching people say that this person should die or like this and that should happen to him. And I'm like, I I just could never be that severe now, but there was a time where I would have been. And it was a time where I denied that I could make a mistake like that. And now that I
Mm-hmm.
know like I've done stupid things or like sometimes I didn't know the severity of like rocks in a national park, I just don't respond with that same level of like anger.
Murder.
Yeah, like and I think it's a huge difference when you've like really accepted like the shadow within yourself. Like your immediate response to things is different and you're safer and also just more trustworthy.
More trustworthy. I mean, that's a big one, I think, for me. And Brad, I like that you're, talking about like how you would have handled these things in the past. I think a lot about, you both know, and a lot of the people listening know, that I had a tapeworm for a few years that I didn't know that I had. And I think I look back on sort of how I was handling a lot of stuff in my life, and I was operating from a place of, I was severely sick, and I felt constantly under threat and unsafe. And I frequently felt like other people weren't doing enough to help keep me safe, whether it was like servers at restaurants or friends inviting me over for food, or my parents. And I think it bled into like my feelings on gender stuff. I mean, I do think that those things are kind of intimately linked, being in your body and like what it feels like to be in your body, and having people not like see what's going on for you. Like I was essentially like invisibly disabled, and so like when people wouldn't get my pronouns or like didn't know what I was talking about, I was like, you aren't doing enough, at the doctor's office, you're not doing enough. Like, and I really had this like pretty consistent and pervasive sense of like, no one is helping me like no one is doing enough to help me stay safe. And I had, I think I'm talking about it kind of in the extreme. Like obviously I had friends and I had community, and I was like understanding of where people were coming from, and where they were at and stuff. But I did feel this sense of like constantly being under threat. And it's interesting now to look back on that and sort of see it as like, yes, it was like where I was like mentally and emotionally at the time. And I see this, it's funny to call a tapeworm like an external factor, because it's obviously a very internal factor, but it's like, it's a parasite. So it's a something else from the outside kind of controlling you. And it definitely impacted even like where I was at in terms of this stage of development thing that we're talking about.
Do you want to say more about that? I'm like,
I can. I mean, I think about other people, it's like other people who are experiencing something similar, whether it's a literal alien parasite or more of an ideological one. And the parasite metaphor is so like profound and has so many applications. But yeah, that like I see the same like reactivity that I used to experience a lot more acutely, and a lot less like, you know, I've been able to sort of prioritize connection, and that has required me to like increase my patience and my tolerance for activation as I've like prioritized joy and awe. A lot of things just like roll off my back a lot more easily. And so when I see other people kind of still in that state, and it's like from various other forms of disenfranchisement and like systemic oppression, you know, I have so much like compassion and understanding for it. And it's, I also, I just feel like I'm in this strange position to have had such like a drastic shift from where I was in terms of like that mindset to like where I am now. And I feel very lucky that I had a concrete thing that could be removed, you know. And I mean, but that also makes me think of things like ritual, you know, like can you ritualistically exorcise ideological parasites so that you can feel safer as you move through the world. And I think also there's this way that you know, and there's like a controversial way to interpret this, but I know you guys will understand, and hopefully you can like take this and run with it. But I really deeply believe, and this is like one of my spiritual takes, that like the belief, the faith in the belief that I am protected is itself a protective force. So like moving through the world believing that I am safe, that I am protected, that there is something looking out for me actually protects me. And moving through the world, you know, conversely, moving through the world thinking that I'm constantly in danger is going to put me more at risk.
That was what came up for me listening to you. Is like, maybe we've talked about this, but that the illness that you were experiencing as a result of this parasite, the physical experience of that, put you into this sort of fight or flight
Constantly.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what we witness. It seems like a lot of people in the far left are in a fight or flight. And I think most likely because of their feelings of systemic oppression, right? There might be personal trauma as well, too, but like it feels like this thing of needing to constantly protect against, like hold the door back from coming in on you, you know?
Yes. Yes. And the idea that like other people aren't doing enough for you.
Yeah. And it's exhausted. It's this defense thing. And it's also like there's something in it too about like, why am I the only good person? Like, why am I the only one who cares about this? There's this sort of like sad, desperate, a little younger person. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a little, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's so much there to talk about. I feel like we could do episodes on this, but I think it's also an addiction. It's like the righteousness of it feels so good, and like um yeah, it's like for a funny example, this morning I like woke up. I like usually check a lot of the messages on the posts. And I like saw a comment that was like, so I shared like this video of a bunch of like teenagers basically like chanting uh pizza, pasta, fish, and chips in the tone of Yankee Doodle, and like very silly, very funny. And basically there was like a comment thread that was like basically like, this is not funny at all. This is probably leading up to a hate crime. And I'm like, like there's a part of me that's just like, again, are you okay? But like more importantly, like what are you getting out of this? I think it's actually like thank you for saving the work. You know what I mean? Like you're so good is what I want to say. Like you saved everybody. Yeah, like good job. You did it. Because I'm like, I think to respond to a situation where teenagers are saying pizza, pasta, fish, and chips in a sing-songy way and being like, I just witnessed a hate crime is like that level of like self-righteousness being like, I'm gonna save everybody around these boys singing Yankee Doodle. Um, and that's like the addiction. I'm like, I I think there'll be a time where if you showed those comments to the people saying that, when they've moved on from that state, like they're gonna be like, holy shit, I did not do that. That has to be edited because it's just so next level, like seeking a victim. Like they found a victim in a situation where there was none so that they could be the savior. Like
Right.
it's that triangle, like of like constantly seeking victims and perpetrators so that you yourself can be the
The
savior.
savior.
And like to me it's from a victim complex. Like even though you're playing the savior, like you are a victim. Like the world is full of people who are like out to get you. Like you get to perform your righteousness and like people love being there. It is like the fucking juice for them.
Were the teenagers boys? Of course they were. I'm sorry, I have a lot to say about this, but like, this is like a way longer topic, but just like, are men allowed to experience joy publicly? Are men allowed to be silly and loud in public without? I'm like, what would this person say about? There's like a crew of guys in New Orleans who they're black teenage boys. They ride through like the really commercial white districts on wheelies with motorcycles going like 100. And I can't even imagine what a person would say about that. It's like you're equating violence to boisterousness. Like, let people have joy and loudness. And you know what I mean? Like, stop trying to, it's just, I don't, yeah.
Listen, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the addiction component because I do think that so much of this stuff, especially the way that it happens online, is dopamine seeking behavior, and especially like we were talking about this before we started recording. Like I just went on Substack. And like every time you open Substack, you are not bombarded with like you got this many likes and this many followers. Like you have to go look for that information, and the result is like people on Substack regularly just post about how much they love Substack. Whereas like you go on Instagram and it's like, look at how many people are giving you attention. Don't you want more attention? Use this app more and more and more and more. Even the colors, the red is like you want more, you want more, you want more. And it's designed this way. So but cancellation I think does really play into this where it's like we just have to reach this goal, right? Where this person gets like erased from my life, from the public, from my community. So anyway, I wanted to hear what you think about
Yeah.
that.
It's interesting because I've, in working in restorative practices, like I see there's never enough, like no matter what a person does, if they've been canceled, they're doing restorative practices, they've, deplatformed themselves, they've gone to fucking rehab, they moved, they whatever, like they've made restitution, like something I've really come to terms with and that I try to educate my clients about is like there is, I don't know if it's dopamine or what exactly the neurochemical is, but like there's a lot of pleasure wrought from keeping you in the box of perpetrator. Even if you move to a fucking ashram and saved 1,000 kids from a burning building, it doesn't matter because you're still like a capital P or capital A abuser, right? Like, and I get putting myself in the opposite position, like I get a sense of identity of being a survivor, of being a victim, of being a crusader, like you said, of being the protector, preventing this from happening to anybody else. I get so much out of keeping you in that box that even if you were like wiped off, I never saw you again, you would still exist as this archetype in my mind because I get a sense of self from it. And there's almost like nothing that someone can do that's worth me giving up that sense of self about.
I think it's that murder impulse. It's like what you were talking about, Brad. And it's like what I think about with my road rage. It's like, I'm like, you don't use your turn signal, murder. Like, that's where my mind goes. I'm also thinking about, like, Brad, when you were talking about the embarrassment, I just wrote a piece that's going to be on Substack about like furthering our conversation that we had on here, Risdon, about repentance rituals and cancellation and like these cycles of like being able to recognize, I've caused harm, I've hurt people, like how do I repair and apologize and like move on. And when you don't have that like inhale and exhale, like the expand and contract of like, moving through those cycles, then it's really easy to just point the finger at other people and be like, I'm all good. But this I touch on this sensation of like feeling like if you spend a lot of time and energy accusing other people of hypocrisy, because that's the worst thing that a hypocrite is the worst thing someone else could be, then you are not going to let yourself change your perspective. So I've been thinking about this a lot with J.K. Rowling, because J.K. Rowling has dug herself into such a massive hole. Dave Chappelle too. Like, where everyone around them, every publicly, like the majority of people, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I don't live in America type of thing, but I'm like, it seems to me like the majority of people think that these two people, J.K. Rowling, is like fucking up. She is on the wrong side of, Emma Watson and Daniel Radcliffe are like, fuck you, J.K. Rowling. And she's like, when are you going to apologize to me? And it's like, she has dug herself into such a big hole that even if she had a change of heart, if she were open to the possibility that she's been wrong, how could she possibly like turn this ship around? Like, she can't, because this has become her platform. Now, if she were not so famous, she could have a change of heart. She could even write about that change of heart and probably open a lot of people's eyes. I mean, I would love to see that from her, but like, I don't see it coming, because how could she ever admit at this point that she was wrong?
Oh man, there's a lot here. And like now I've had too much caffeine to hold it all together. But yeah, this is a huge problem. Also relates to like social justice, online culture, and like there's a certain so sometimes like I see people who are like in the like sauce. They're lost in the sauce. They're like just constantly just gossiping. Everybody's bad. They're like in crazy takes where I'm like, your family probably like wants an intervention, like you know the type. And I'm like, why are they doing this? This is not good for them. But the thing is that like you get an instant reward, which is that like you get all the people who are in that same space as you liking it. It's like the easy response. Like for example, the people who like hear Yankee Doodle and see a hate crime, like all the other people who are in that place will like it and be like, yeah, like fuck these boys who are horrible. And like you don't get that from being like mature. Like mature people aren't giving you kudos for like every little thing that you write. It has to be like deeper work. Um, like it's a very so I was talking about this with a friend, like to be like a figure, like to be a public figure. A lot of people want that these days. Like being a public figure is like a really desirable like position.
An influencer.
Yeah, an influencer, like a pundit, all these things. Like literally just speaking. And to do it like on the left or the right, like you can get so much like instant success so quick by like just pandering to like the most outrageous like takes that are kind of like doctrine in those circles, because like they all follow each other, this like tiny group. But you can never get past it because it's just so silly that like most people aren't gonna vibe with it. You know what I mean? Like, but if you started having like nuance, like deep dives, like it's very hard to move up that way. There's an instant like it feels really good at the beginning to just like throw out the like most annoying like everything is a slogan kind of takes. You get like a couple thousand followers from that, but then you just are stuck there. But the other thing is that like when you get like another part of cancel culture on the left, like as a strategy, is that when you get canceled, like you can just hop over to like the right wing grift because
Yes.
they will accept you.
They
And
come for you. They say,
yeah,
"Hey, are you ready? Are you ready to
yeah,
come over here? We
like
won't
see how
dance. You
crazy
can
these
say whatever you
people
want."
are, like come
Mm-hmm.
join us. And I think that's like a huge problem because you like recently Don Lemon was like fired from CNN a couple years ago, I think at this point. My sense of time is so skewed. But then he like went and did a couple interviews with like other figures and had these takes and people were like, "Oh, what a grifter, blah blah blah." And they were kind of like celebrating like look how bad he is, like see it confirms like our hatred of this man. And I was like, giving people the only option to go to the right seems like such a like awful thing to do. Like sending people, you know what I mean? Like and people
Yeah.
are no matter how like convicted they are, no matter like how much integrity they have, you're not gonna go where people dehumanize you. Like if people give you your job back, but you always have to like humble yourself and debase yourself, like that's I don't think no matter how much integrity you have, I don't think you should do that. Like I don't think you should put yourself in a place where people don't see your human value.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna take a little piece of that. And I just wrote this thing that came out yesterday on Substack about the like pitfalls of being like of like making yourself out to be a thank you for telling me person. Where you're just like if like that's a beautiful thing. It can be very connecting when someone says no to you or states a boundary. It's like it lets them know that they can do it again, that they're safe with you, whatever. But when it gets taken to this like extreme place where like anyone can say anything to me and I will just say thank you for telling me, you end up with so many projections of other people's shit where you you then you're essentially just absorbing it, right? Thank you for telling me, thank you for telling me, thank you for telling me. And it chips away at your sense of self and at your integrity because you then stop discerning like when is this legitimate feedback and when does this have absolutely nothing to do with me. I had someone tell me that they were upset that I was like my workbook was being published by the same publisher that they had used and that I was charging the same amount for my book. And I remember being like, this was like the final straw that broke the camel's back in this friendship that was sort of constantly like that. It was like everything that I was doing was potentially like threatening to them or taking something from them. And, that came from like their own experience of systemic oppression for their entire lives and like, various forms of disenfranchisement and people truly taking things from them. But because I had made myself, like they said to me, I knew that you would, I was like, I need some space. Like, I need to think about this. And they were like, I was like, I don't feel trust and autonomy in this friendship. Like, I feel like I'm being controlled. And they were like, well, I trusted that you would take it well. And that really cut me because I was like, of course you thought I would take it well because I've made it clear that all I will ever say to you is thank you for telling me.
And then
And
that person has no responsibility to they can say whatever the
exactly.
fuck they want to you. I'm like, normalize telling a bitch when she's crazy. I'm
Right,
sorry.
right,
This sounds
right.
like a you problem.
Yes.
I already took my hoops out, but I would be doing it right now otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a thing that, when people see you as someone who's just going to be like, and this is like the feedback thing, right? Like online in particular, Brad, and I think like you and I experience this a lot, like the commentary that you get. First of all, comments in your on posts on Instagram are not feedback. I don't want feedback from people I don't know and whose opinions I wouldn't solicit. And that is a boundary that I have only found in the last year and a half, because before that I really thought that accountability meant I had to listen to everybody. And the problem with trying to listen to everybody is that people are going to have conflicting takes. Like you just said, Brad, those two gay guys that you were talking about, one was like, no, queer is this, and the other one was like, I don't know, it's a little more open. And it's like, okay, so those two people are going to be in conflict, but because those two people have a relationship, they're not trying to murder each other or murder you. So but the commentary on Instagram is very often, and we have no way of knowing, but like it could be an incel, it could be a Nazi, it could be a 12-year-old person, it could be like people who, I described this in the piece that I wrote. It's like, think about when you're at the grocery store or when you're on the subway, like look around, how many people would you ask for their opinion?
Go to America and
Go
ask
to
yourself,
America.
do I want these people's opinion?
Oh, wow. So this is like one of the fundamental problems of cancel culture is that when I post about like, hey, predation in the wild is a part of nature, people come and have the wildest takes about like actually wolves are bad, actually like this shouldn't like, and you're like, wow, this isn't serious like discourse. And everything I say, in fact, like Yankee Doodle is fucking hate crime. Like, but so this is a huge realization for me. When you're like watching comment sections just go to like absolutely like shit show, it's like this is what cancel culture is too. Like even when it's about people having done wrong, you still have the same level of people who are just looking for fucking like shit to be mad about, who are not giving people the benefit of the doubt, who are like looking for monsters, who are like not self-aware. Like just because there's like serious fuck ups doesn't mean that like all the people joining in are reasonable whatsoever. And that was like a big realization for me is like watching like the public shaming like campaigns happen is like, oh, this like this amount of vitriol happens even with Yankee fucking Doodle. So like why should we take it seriously like when the pitchforks come for like something else. And not to say that there's not like serious issues that people should be upset about. Of course, sometimes the public shaming is over a very serious thing where like the anger is deserved. Not to say that it has to like go the extent it does with public shaming, but a lot of times it's just like a figure who has the like Yankee Doodle is a hate crime mentality, but like to someone's like alleged mistake. And that's like, I don't know. To me, it's so important to say that like people are gonna go nuts over Yankee Doodle. So maybe we shouldn't like put value in people going nuts over people's mistakes because so many of the people who are joining in are also like just mad about everything in general.
Acting out, I mean, like Instagram is like a great, I mean, I joke that I can usually tell how mentally well I am by if I'm commenting on people's shit. Like I yeah, if I'm like spouting off about landlords in some, you know what I mean, then I'm like, oh, I need to get a therapy appointment, you know what I mean, because I'm acting out because I have anger and frustration and whatever, and that feels like a safe place to do it because of the anonymity. You know what I mean? And it's like the people who like what I say are going to be like, yeah, like little heart high fives. And people who don't like it are going to say something shitty and I'm going to say something back. And it's like, I am not well when I'm doing that. Like, I'm not well. And it feels really good in the same way that, like, probably doing cocaine feels good or like putting my fist through a wall feels good. Like, nothing really becomes of it. It's just like a little hit, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it makes you feel like you're part of a community because other people thumbs up it or like it
Yeah,
or
I
whatever.
feel very like I'm flipping my hair over my shoulder and people are like, yeah, bitch, you tell them, which is like,
Yeah,
I love that feeling. And if I can't get that from my friends in real life, then I'll settle for it online,
yeah.
you know?
Risen, I know you have to go. Do
Don't
you have to
go.
go?
We're
Don't
just getting
go.
started.
Yeah.
I
It
mean, we
does
can.
kind of feel like we're just getting started, doesn't it?
Well, we can do
Yeah.
another one of these. I do think it's important to say, like, Brad, we talked about this the other night, but like when we there's always the question of like, but what about the Harvey Weinsteins and Jeffrey Epsteins and things like that? And like I said, for me, it's like not my monkeys, not my problem. Like I'm not dealing with that kind of extreme, and I'm not dealing with the law. Like that's not where I operate. But I do think that like calling that cancellation, like I just want to have a different way to describe that because for me that is like those are extreme cases where I'm like yeah, maybe someone out there could like attempt to rehabilitate those people so that they can like make their way back into society. But that's not me. Like, I'm not going to do that. Um, but then I feel like when we call that cancellation, it's like when I think of cancellation, I'm thinking of like the way that it takes place sort of specifically on social media. I'm not talking about like Bill Cosby being
Right.
like, yeah,
There's a difference between like a campaign based on like you're not allowed to go to the coffee shop that I go to anymore versus like experiencing fucking like I think differentiating between consequences and cancellation, right? Like
yeah,
we're talking about people that needed to be institutionalized. I'm not necessarily talking about prison, but institutional rehabilitation. And I've had clients who needed to go to an institutional rehabilitation place and I'm glad they did. And, I think we're not talking about that, like people who it's like, yo, like there's a pattern of addiction or some stuff here that needs to be addressed with. We're talking about people who like, said what is they spelled women with an X or a Y instead of
right. And they
right.
got
We're talking about
canceled. Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I think it's such an interesting question and people don't like address it a lot, but like actually this conversation was happening recently. I had a nice hetero bros night watching UFC. But people were talking about like cancel culture and mentioned that like the Harvey Weinsteins and people like that. It's not cancellation. Those are like actual prosecutions. Like
Right, right, right.
they did something very fucking illegal and very, very damaging. And so like I don't think any of us are like going to stop the prosecution from happening. It seems pretty important that those consequences happen. However, like a pretty easy line for me is like, could you go to jail for this thing? Then maybe we shouldn't be like publicly shaming this person. Like, there's such to me, it's a very clear difference, and there's still, of course, like a lot of gray area and a lot of like nuance to be had. But like, a prosecution of a serious crime is something so different than like this guy in the heat of the moment called someone a bitch
Yeah,
or even like actual interpersonal like serious interpersonal conflict is still different than like unintentional crime.
and abuse of power.
Yeah, and abuse of power, like
Yeah,
there's huge differences. So yeah, I do think it's important, like when I talk about cancel culture, one, I don't think in absolutes, but two, like I'm not out here. I'm not going to take a fall for someone like Harvey Weinstein. So
Yeah, like we're not judge, jury, prosecutors. You know what I mean? Like when people come to me for restorative practices when they've been canceled, like the first thing I ask them is, are there legal proceedings? I can't work with you until that part's over, and then I've had people come to me and be like, yeah, there was an investigation and there were no charges brought. And I'm like, all right, then we can get started. You know what I mean? But we can't conflate the two. Like, restorative practices, accountability practices are not for people who have like severely harmed people to the point where the state has become involved. Like,
mm,
you know,
yeah, and like totally agree. And I think that like then there's conversations of like I do still think we should humanize and empathize with people in prison, which is a professed value by most social justice people I know, but it's not a
right.
practice one. And
Yeah, they would only empathize once they're incarcerated because they're an abolitionist. But when it comes to the court of public opinion, yeah,
yeah, I mean, very early on in my activist career, like somewhere in my early 20s, someone ran like a prison abolition organization where they had like pen pals and stuff, and they were very serious about this, and they were also in like the social justice space that was like their community, but they were like talking about like in a very serious way, which I laughed at, but they were failing to see the humor in it. But they were like, everybody wants to like write letters to prisoners as this like nice abolitionist thing to do until they find out the people in prison caused harm and then they're out.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And they were so serious, like, and so now they have to like tell people who are going to sign up to do that, like, hey, by the way, these people in prison, like, they've done bad things, so
Right. Duh.
I think
don't
this speaks to
abandon them.
yeah, I think this speaks to too. It's like, do you believe people are capable of rehabilitation? Do you believe that people are capable of reflecting and changing their behavior and having remorse? You know, because if you don't, then cancellation makes sense. People are disposable if they are incapable of change. The prison industrial complex maybe makes sense if you think people who commit crimes are bad people. But do any of us really fucking think that? Like
Well,
none of you would be friends with me if I wasn't capable of change. Like 6 years ago, I was a nightmare alcoholic. You know what I mean? Like that's just nobody actually like. Of course, we believe people are capable of
well,
change.
and those very people who want to say that like the people who have done bad things are bad, like are they looking at, have they never done anything wrong? You know, like and Brad, we've talked about how like anytime anyone like unearths someone's tweet from 10 years ago, like if you go look at that person's tweets from 6 months ago, they've said some horrific shit. And and then there's the question of like, right, there's that guy who was like kicked off of SNL because he routinely and currently like spews, racist, hateful stuff. And it's like, okay, like, do we want that guy on SNL? I don't know, but is that person demonstrating remorse? Is that person interested in change? It doesn't seem that way. Okay, so now we decide that no, he can't be on this show, but is he allowed to have a career? Not for me to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a big barometer for me when people come to me. Is I'm just like, that's like the first thing I'm judging for is this person capable of remorse? Are they interested in change and like reflection and ownership of what they've done wrong?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Guys, I know that we have to stop, right? Or
Yeah, I gotta go.
yeah, okay. I want to do this again because I want to talk to you both and like have all of us share how like the work that we do or like everything that we've sort of done, you know, up till now, like for me, and I think both of you have shared this with me, that like you kind of hit a wall at which point you're like, oh, I guess God, and
Mm.
like I want to talk to you guys about that wall and like what that was like for you. So maybe we do a part two.
Okay.
Okay.
Part
Let's
two, God, BRB.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
yeah, let's do it. I'd love that. It was fun. It was fun to talk about this. I feel like we could all probably go on forever.
Yeah, truly. I mean, and we will. It just won't be recorded.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Okay, bye.